just ask you a number of questions focused on the same, that they can put together as some kind of statement.
Okay.
And then we'll just continue afterwards.
Okay.
With a real interview.
Heavy questions. No board? Yeah.
Okay. Could you tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you're talking about mouse?
Well, at this point, my problem in talking about mouse is that nothing comes to mind. I've sort of talked myself out and have found myself repeating myself a lot.
1 moment, I have to break you a moment. Stop. Stop.
Okay, are we moving or?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been asked a lot of questions in a number of interviews now about mouse, and I finally reached the point where I'm quite talked out. The work took me 8 years, and in the past year I think I've spent another 8 years talking about the book. And although it was flattering and probably useful for disseminating the fact that a book existed, I have a strong yearning now to go back and fight it out with a piece of paper again and continue the research that will end up becoming Mouse 2.
Yeah, that sounds great. If you, the success of Mouse, did it change your working on Mouse, your thinking about the work itself, or did nothing essentially change?
Mouse's success came kind of as a surprise to me, a pleasant one, I suppose. The main effect of which has been to keep me away from the drawing table, as I just said. And getting back to the drawing table has involved kind of having to work through the fact that it's been well received. In a way, when something's well received, I become suspicious of it, like maybe it's not that good. If people understand it, there must be something wrong. And actually, as a result of what's been happening, I've had to sort of begin working in a different direction than I first expected the second book to go. It involved acknowledging some of what's been going down for me and the impact it's had on me, and that'll probably become part of, threaded into the narrative that I'm working on now.
Can you divulge anything about the direction you will take with Mouse switch to Catskills?
Well, the book I'm working on now, Mauschwitz to the Catskills and Beyond, will, on the one hand, continue my parents' narrative and deal with what happened to them inside the concentration camps and Hitler's death factories, and take them through into the post-war years a little bit. It'll also deal with the narrative, the then-present of narrative, which had to do with my father's life in Queens, and talk a little bit of what happened to him until he died in '82. And what's become necessary for me now is to add a third layer of present in order to keep the work alive and vital for myself. And that present, I have to ask you to be patient and wait and see, because it's still being developed for me. But eventually, you and your children and grandchildren can have a look, probably with your grandchildren, because it's going to take me forever.
It is, I'm sorry, it's just it's a bit hard for me because I'm trying to phrase a question that will not. Mouse is being received positively as a brilliant, or in my view brilliant, maybe in others, Jules Pfeiffer called it brilliant, research into the lives of the second generation, end of the survivors put together. Did it disturb you that Mouse was only, or in Holland it was, received as a book about that and not as a comic strip, which as such broke into new ground?
This is going to be difficult because there's two questions here.
Try the simple one first, please.
I don't know which one's simple. It's just two different ones. if Mouse is perceived as somehow speaking for a second generation, I think it's a misperception, because it's speaking for one member of a generation. And I think it becomes clear in the work that I'm very cautious about generalizations. I'm interested in specifics, and resist any attempt to make further abstraction from this work. I think that the book functions in a way that allows it to talk about several things, including, of course, the horrors of recent history, and also the relationships between one generation and another, specifically my relationship within that. And it also functions in a way that allows a complexity of a thematic complexity to happen that I suppose hasn't been associated with comics that often. One thing that was kind of weird in America was when it was getting reviewed a lot, people would say, "This is impossible, it's a comic strip, and comic strips don't do that." And then, after saying that, they'd forget about the fact that it was a comic strip and discuss it primarily as if it was a novel, because reviewers tend to be writers, and writers relate to writing. And as a result, the writing about Mouse tended to be about its more narrative aspects, which is fine, actually, in this instance. I did make a comic strip that I wanted people to read, with the emphasis on read, and the visuals are subsumed in a certain way that allows that to happen. On the other hand, it isn't a written novel, and the pictures are intrinsic and essential to it. It can't exist without the pictures, and things happen within the pictures and within the breakdowns on a page that are specific to the comic strip form. And what all of that indicated to me was how illiterate writers are on the subject of comics, and that there's almost no critical vocabulary that they have which allows them to look at what happens inside the work. Not that they necessarily should, but insofar as any kind of criticism exists, the criticism tends to be about the verbal narrative structure rather than the visual narrative structure. That's curious.
It doesn't disturb you?
It doesn't disturb me. I think that it's symptomatic of where comics are in the culture. I think that the situation is probably in the process of changing now, at least in America, pretty dramatically. And the danger that I see in the future is that comics may be taken all too seriously, which isn't to have any... it's not that I'm trying to say anything about my specific book saying, don't take it seriously, folks. It's not that. It's just that I'm interested in the friction. I'm interested in... One of the reasons that I'm interested in working in comics is I'm interested in fighting against that particular tendency to dismiss comics as garbage. On the other hand, I suppose that if that battle is totally won, it would be very essential to insist that comics are garbage, because it's the only way to keep the thing moving and alive. I think one of the problems in the European comics I've been seeing is a kind of elegance and bourgeois fatness has set in that really could be well served by a bit more of an art gangsterism approach.
Mag ik iets meer ruimte houden nadat hij uitgesproken is?
Ja.
En niet lachen onder geen geluid onder de praat.
Ja, sorry. Is dit genoeg, Tom? Over...
Nee, het is stop even tape. Wacht even. Ja.
Well, you have got the award for the best foreign-made comic from the Dutch organization Stripschap. You have seen the Dutch version. It is almost a copy of the American edition. Do you have any comment on that, about how it's done, lettering, translations?
Okay. when I was approached by foreign publishers to translate Maus, I insisted on several things, one of which was a kind of control over what would happen to the translation and to the lettering, and insisted that the cover remain the same and the format remain the same, so that at least the book wouldn't become another book in the process of arriving in other countries. At this point, I think there's 12 different editions in the works, and it was really impossible for me to know what was happening in each language in terms of the translation. In the Dutch edition, I'm very, very grateful to Johannes van Dam, who made the book possible. The first attempts at translation, I think, were very problematic, to say the least. And Johannes, who I've known for a long time, was someone with a background and ability to render the book correctly, it seems to me, without knowing Dutch. It was possible in conversations on the phone to see that he was operating on a proper frequency to let it happen. And I'm very happy with Bruna as a publisher in that it seemed somehow provocative and interesting to be able to work with a publishing situation that was outside of the, if you'll pardon the word, ghetto of BD and comics. And that seemed to be a great opportunity in Holland. About the only things I'm not 100% happy with, I suppose, are the lettering. It's a compromise. It was a necessary compromise, but a compromise in that, for me, making Maus was an intimate work in the sense that it was, and one of the ways that intimacy was achieved was by letting the drawing be a kind of handwriting. It was done with fountain pen. The same pen, basically, was used to make the writing marks and the drawing marks. And that creates a kind of unity that has to be lost when somebody else does it, unless one has a master forger at hand. We made several attempts, but I think what happened was Dutch draftsmen and artists have a tendency toward crisp, cleanly work, you know, and when they looked at my lettering, they said, he draws real bad, he writes real badly, so I know how to make bad writing. And it didn't look like the right kind of bad lettering, so it just seemed out of place in the balloons. And the closest we could come was to use something that was rather quiet and clean. At least that way it could acknowledge that it was a translation and float to the background and allow at least the drawings to have the specific marks and vitality such as they had. About the only thing that became distorted in the process were these S's that I've been hearing about. In the course of the actual writing of the book, my lettering tends to be quite angular, and in fact my drawing tends to be quite angular. And although it's true that this is a certain kind of S and reminds one maybe on some subliminal way of an SSS in English, it's quite subliminal because the lettering is all of a piece. Here in the Dutch edition, where the letters are all quite neatly made and quite standardized, the S really stands out like a traffic light and creates a kind of a coarseness of message that has nothing to do with the original. And if there's any problem, perhaps that's the problem.
Yeah? Okay. Tom, genoeg? You will be getting the award, of course. It's I'm happy that you won't be able to come to Den Haag and accept it yourself. But we have, and you have found a solution to overcome that problem. Would you please introduce for us the person that will come as your representative?
Okay. I'm very sorry that I won't be able to be in Den Haag when the awards are given. I'm in Amsterdam now at the very end of September and only for one day. So at least through the magic of modern electronics, it's possible to acknowledge my thanks for the award. Fortunately, you know, when I think of Holland, usually, you know, there's only a few things that I think of. It's wooden shoes, windmills, Rembrandt, and Joost Swart. A friend of mine for many years and an artist I have great, great respect and admiration for, who I've been fortunate enough to have collaborate with me on Raw magazine, and who's one of your country's national treasures, basically, and I'm very happy that he can come and accept the award for me. Thank you.